topic we're going to be going over for this presentation are the naming of Browns Park, Mountain Man, and Fort Davy Crockett, several of the deaths in Browns Park in the early 1800s, and Outlaws Thanksgiving dinner. Browns Park name. There are several stories of how Browns Park got its name. Browns Park was first called Browns Hole because it could place hold up for the winter. Rufus S. Sage, who camped in Browns Park in 1842, said it was named after a trapper named Brown. John Wesley Powell said it is named after a trapper who had a cabin in the area. Ann Bassett said it's named after a man called Bibleback Brown. J.S. Hoy said it was named from immigrants who said it looked like a big brown hole between the mountains. John Wesley Powell said he changed the name to Browns Park because it looked more like a park than a hole. Ann Bassett said her mother, Mary Elizabeth Bassett, changed the names to Browns Park because she did not like the name Browns Hole. Mountain Man and Fort Davy Crockett. Mountain Man started coming into Browns Hole in the early 1800s. Fort Davy Crockett was built by Mountain Man Thompson, Craig, and Sinclair in 1837, named after Fort Davy Crockett, who was killed the year before at the Alamo in 1836. Some mountain men said that Fort Davy Crockett was more like Fort Misery. It was close to the water and there were lots of bugs. The fort consisted of a one-story building. It was constructed of wood and plate with 3 connecting wings that were not enclosed. Instead of cows, the fort had goats. Fort Davy Crockett was located along the Green River, where Vermont Creek flows into the Green, just south and east from the marker at the Door Cemetery. Kit Carson, Jack Robinson, Abe Baker, and others stayed at Fort Davy Crockett. The fort was abandoned in 1840, just 3 years after it was constructed. There's the marker at the Door Cemetery, talks about the Fort Davy Crockett. H.M. Hook, first mayor of Cheyenne, Wyoming. On August 20th, 1867, Hook won the election with Ed Brown by 5 votes, become Cheyenne, Wyoming's first mayor. Now there's a few newspaper articles when H.M. Hook was mayor, some of the notice he sent out and city ordinances. Then the Wyoming Weekly Reader has an article when H.M. Hook left Cheyenne to go on a trip to Sweetwater County, and that's in June 5th, 1869. H.M. Hook drowns in the Green River in 1869. In June of 1869, Hook went on a mining expedition with a group of men leaving Green River, Wyoming. They were going down the river in a boat to Brown's Hole. In the rapids at Red Creek or at Red Canyon, Hook's boat tipped over. Hook was stranded on a rock, and the other men in the boat were able to hang on to the boat and float ashore. Hook was a good swimmer and thought he could swim ashore. As he started swimming, he went under the water and was never heard from again. One newspaper says that another man also drowned with Hook. Hook's body was discovered 2 weeks later by Mr. Heisa, 60 miles below where he drowned, reported by the Wyoming Weekly Reader on June 26, 1869. That 60 miles is probably wrong because that would put the drowning above the city of Green River, Wyoming, where they started the trip. He left behind his wife Jenny, 2 kids. Harry was 7 and Natalie was 4, and there's newspaper articles about his drowning. H.M. Hook's grave in Browns Park. After Hook's drowning, his wife offered up $1,000 reward for the location of his grave in Brown Park. I could not find any evidence of this reward being offered up. It was not in the newspaper. You think it would be in the newspaper and that stuff for people to hear about it, but there's no newspaper article about it. And I think it was just made up by somebody long after he He died that there was not a $1,000 reward. Actually, his wife was hurting for money, and she even had to buy back his livestock stable in an auction, and she was selling books to get money. Now, according to Minnie Krause, John Jardy said that his grave, Hook's grave, was across the river from his place, marked with a white rock. And J.H. Hoy said that Hook's grave was a reference point in Browns Park. Now, there's a picture of the grave across the river from the Jardy place. It is marked with a white rock. And also, there's a marker there that used to be up at the Jardy Rents for a makeshift cemetery that was there, but that cemetery has taken down because nobody was buried there. Hook's family after his death. Jenny Hook had to buy her husband's corral business in 1875 for $1,050. She also sold other items to support herself. One article mentioned that she was selling some good books, among which one was a Mark Twain book titled Roughing It. Jenny Hook died in 1896 in Cripple Creek, Colorado. Their daughter Natalie died in 1901 at Fort Collins, Colorado, and Henry Hook died in 1926 in Chicago, Illinois. There's a couple of newspaper articles about the Hook family. Afterwards, there's Natalie's grave in Fort Collins there. First killing in Browns Park. Bill Titworth kills Charlie Powles. Bill Titworth had a cabin in Wyoming. He married Jenny Law in July 24th, 1872, and was Charlie Krause's brother-in-law. Bill Titworth and Charlie Powles were wrestling together. They had a disagreement over the division of some of the stock they had wrestled. Bill Titworth and Charlie Krause went to Charlie Powles' place in Little Hole along the Green River to confront him about the livestock Bill thought belonged to him. There's a picture of a cabin in Little Hole. Charlie Powles' death in 1878. When Bill and Charlie arrived at the Powles place, they stopped at the fence by the house and called out for Charlie Powles. Bill put his shotgun against the fence. Charlie Powles came out the cabin and walked over to them at the fence. An argument started between Titworth and Powles. Powles took out his knife and grabbed Bill across the fence and started stabbing at him. Bill's clothing was torn in several places before he was able to break loose. He grabbed his shotgun and shot Charlie. When Charlie was down on the ground, Bill shot him again in the back, killing him. Bill Titworth turned himself in to authorities in Green River, Wyoming. The death of Charlie was ruled as self-defense, and there's a newspaper article about the killing of Charlie Powles. Charlie Powles' grave. Charlie Powles was buried by his cabin in loose sandy soil. He wasn't buried very deep. As a result of the sandy, shallow burial, scavenger animals dug up Charlie's body and the bones became exposed. Someone seen Charlie's skull on the ground, took up a stick and stuck it on a pole at Charlie's grave. Soon Bill Titworth heard that Charlie's friend, Blackjack Ketchum, was after him for killing Charlie. Bill left Browns Park for Iowa, and this escaped funding was provided by his brother-in-law, Charlie Krause. There's a picture of a possible grave there in Little Hole. Dr. Parsons' son, Warren, and his wife, Annie, were the first Parsons in Browns Park. They came in the 1870s. Annie was the first white lady in Browns Park. Dr. Parsons ran the first post office in Browns Park. He had a ferry across the river, the Green River, in Browns Park. Dr. Parsons died January 12, 1881, of old age. He was buried at his ranch. There's also a marker for him at the Leroy Cemetery. Dr. Parsons' granddaughter, Susan Allen, died about a year later, July 23, 1882. She's also buried at the ranch right next to Dr. John Parson. John Jarvie writes in his journal on January 13, 1881, "Today I assist in the burial of Dr. John Parson. He died very suddenly from the time he was smitten, but he said he has been looking forward to it for the past 20 years, some kind of affection of the heart." After the Parsons and Allen family left the park, outlaws used the Parson Ranch as a hideout. There are many older buildings at the Parson Ranch. The Parsons' home itself was burnt down in 1980 by deer hunters. There's a picture of Dr. Parson and a picture of his obituary that appeared in the Colorado Wiki Register on February 4th, 1881. Dr. Parsons' grave and granddaughter Susan Allen's grave. Dr. Parsons was the first white man to die of natural causes in Browns Park. Dr. Parsons was buried at his ranch property in Browns Park. Dr. Parsons' granddaughter Susan LeGrand Allen was born September 16, 1881 in Browns Park. Baby Susan died July 23, 1882 in Browns Park. She is the first female to die in Browns Park. First white female, I should say. Susan was buried by her grandfather, Dr. Parson, in Browns Park. The graves are east of the Parson Ranch at the base of the hill. Dr. Parson is not buried at the North Cemetery. There's his grave marker, with Dr. Parson being on one side of the grave marker and his granddaughter Susan being on the other side. Charlie Robinson killed by Jesse Ewing, March 1880. Jesse and Charlie and others were playing cards at the Rock Saloon by the Green River. Charlie was winning money and Jesse was losing. Charlie decided it was time to go back to his camp, and Jesse followed. As they crossed the Green River on ice, Jesse stabbed and killed Charlie. Jesse stopped at a camp and told some people to go up the river and they would see the prettiest corpse they ever seen. Another story says that Jesse stopped at the Jarvie place and told John Jarvie about the prettiest corpse on the river. But in March of 1880, John Jarvie had not moved to Browns Park yet. He was still living in Rock Springs, Wyoming. Charlie was buried somewhere near the Rock Saloon. Newspapers said the killing was over borrowed betting that Charlie was helping Jesse collect. The newspaper also mentioned that Charlie was from Fillmore, Utah. Jesse was captured, but the death was ruled as self-defense. There's a picture of a possible grave there by the old Rock Saloon and a picture of Charlie Robinson. Charlie Robinson. Charlie Robinson was born January 19, 1837 in Pennsylvania. In July of 1865, he married Emma S. Nichols in Virginia City, Nevada. Emma died in 1869. At the age of 33, Charlie married 14-year-old Jane Bradfield on November 7, 1870 in Salt Lake City. Charlie was also called Buckskin Charlie because he always wore buckskins. They lived in Fillmore, Utah. They had one son together, George Wilbur Robinson, born August 21st, 1871 in Fillmore, Utah. In the late 1870s, Charlie left Fillmore to go hunting, trapping, or mining expedition and was never heard from the family again until his death. On March 18, 1880, a telegram was sent to his wife telling them of his death. And there's a picture of his wife Jane and their son George. Here's 3 newspaper articles I found about the killing. And they're all were done in Salt Lake. One is the Salt Lake Tribune, the other 2 is Salt Lake Herald Republican. But the first one talks about Charlie Robinson going to Browns Park. He is from Fillmore, Utah, and with his partner Tom Miller. And the other ones talk about the killing of Charlie Robinson by Jesse Ewing. Possible Charlie Robinson's mine in Ewing Canyon. The commemorative tombstone at the Jarvie Ranch says he staked the mine claim too close to Jesse Ewing's property. Charlie's mine was on the opposite ridge across from Jesse Ewing's mine. There's a picture of the tombstone at the Jarvie Ranch, community tombstone at the Jarvie Ranch, and it does not actually mark Charlie Robinson's actual grave, but there's a picture of possible his mine on the east ridge of the Ewing Canyon, and Jesse Ewing was on the west ridge. It's a newspaper article from Laramie that talked about the capture of Jesse Ewing. A warrant was made for Jesse Ewing's arrest. Many lawmen were hesitant to come into Browns Park and feared Jesse Ewing. Sheriff Allison came into Browns Park with a posse. The sheriff had 2 Browns Park men with him who identified Jesse Ewing. At James Goodson cabin, the arrest was made. Jesse pulled out his knife during the arrest, but he was hit in the head with a 6-shooter. Jesse claimed self-defense, and since there were no witnesses, he was released. Jack Rose, 1882. Jack Rose was hired by the Bassett family to break wild horses. One day, 3 men from Texas came to the Bassett Ranch and asked the cook, Jenny James, if she knew where Jack Rose was. Jenny pointed towards the crowd and said, "That's Jack over there, saddling horse." The 3 men went over to Jack. Without saying a word, they shot Jack in the back. Elizabeth and Herb Bassett and other workers hurried over to the scene with their guns drawn and disarmed the visitors from Texas. The Bassetts then went to Jack and aid and carried him into the bunkhouse and laid him on the bed. There's a picture of the crowds there at the Bassett Ranch. Jack Rose dies. As Jack was laying on the bed, Elizabeth invited the 3 Texans into the bunkhouse. Elizabeth asked them why they shot Jack in the back. One man answered, stating that his name was Hamilton and Jack killed his brother in Aberdeen, Texas 2 years ago. Elizabeth answered, "Well, you don't come here and shoot an unarmed man in the back." Jack stated that he had killed a man named Hamilton who was married to his sister. His sister's husband had beaten and abused his sister. Elizabeth gave Jack a gun and told him to go ahead and shoot the man that shot him in the back. But Jack was too weak to hold the gun. Jack died shortly afterwards and is buried at the Lador Cemetery. There's a picture of his grave at the Lador Cemetery. Killers lynching. A man from Texas was taken into the Bassett house and held captive. Some of the workers and Elizabeth left to find help and the Justice of the Peace, J.S. Hoy. Herb Bassett became nervous, feeling that the 3 men were going to be lynched. Herb let the men go and told them to turn themselves in to the sheriff in Hans Peak. When Elizabeth came back, Herb told her that the man had escaped. Elizabeth was upset and took some of the workers to track the man. According to Josie Bassett, they caught up with the 3 Texans and lynched them in Irish Canyon. There's a picture of them, the Bassett Ranch house. Jesse Ewing killed by Frank Duncan in 1885. Jesse Ewing mined and cabin were in Ewing Canyon. Jesse would hire people to help work his mine. It seems that when it came time to pay them for the work, they would disappear. One time in Rock Springs, Jesse brought back a girlfriend named Madam Forrest for companionship. Jesse hired Frank Duncan to work for him. Frank and Madam Forrest started to like each other. One time Frank faked being sick and did not go to work in the mine that day. After a day of work, Jesse headed home. Frank ambushed Jesse and killed him. Frank and Madam Forrest left Browns Park together. Before leaving, they told John Jarvie they had killed Jesse in self-defense. And there's a picture of a cabin there in Ewing Canyon. There's actually 2 of them very close together. They're dugout type cabins in the hillside. News of Jesse Ewing's death. This is from the Rock County Courier newspaper, June 22nd, 1905, 20 years after Jesse Ewing was killed. Pioneer story, Dr. John A. Campbell tells brief tales of the early days of Rock County. A man named Jesse Ewing, by name, found gold in the upper end of the park on Willow Creek in 1868. He was a man whose reputation was greatly at fault. In consequences of his misdeeds, he was shot and killed by a man named Duncan in 1882. Duncan was taken to Ashley in Utah, where he was tried for murder and acquitted. Jury saying that he had done a good deed, just what should have been done 10 years before. And there's a picture of the spring by Jesse Ewing's cabin. Jesse's mind was just down the canyon from his cabin, and a picture of what possibly could be the remains of his mind in Jesse Ewing Canyon. In July of 1889, a group of 5 men were traveling through Browns Park. The grizzly bear attacked one of the men. The man tried to pull his gun and shoot the bear, but the bear was too quick and powerful. The man was dead before his friends could help. The man is buried somewhere in Browns Park. There's a newspaper article from the Cheyenne Daily Sun about the story of the grizzly bear killing a man in Browns Park. Charlie Surge stabbed to death at Christmas party in 1891. Christmas Eve 1891, Charlie Krause had a party. His wife and kids had gone for the holiday. Joe Tolliver wanted Charlie Surge to drink with him. Joe tried to wrestle Charlie down to make him drink. Charlie Surge pinned Joe down. Joe took out his knife and stabbed Charlie above the heart. Charlie died several hours later. VH Valentine Boyd, Tom Davenport, John Jarvis received subpoenas to the court as witnesses. Because the ground was so frozen, Charlie Krause built a stone wall around Charlie Surge's grave and filled it in with dirt. Surge's death was considered an accident because Joe was drunk. There's a picture of Charlie Surge's grave. The news of the stabbing came when he went up Papoose January 1st, 1892. Talks about Charlie Krause having the party and Joe Tolliver and Charlie Surge getting in a wrestling match, and Charlie's pinning Joe down. And Joe Tolliver took out his knife and stabbed Charlie. Charlie went out to get on his horse and leave, and he came back into the cabin and telling everybody, "I've been stabbed." And they took care of him. It took him 4 days after the stabbing to die. He was about 30 years old. There's a picture of Charlie Surge's grave in Browns Park. Also, picture of Charlie and his brother Albert. Albert's on the left, Charlie on the right. Charlie was about 30 years old when he died. Joe Tolliver's trial. Joe Tolliver was charged with killing Charlie Surge. Court was moved to Provo, Utah. Tom Davenport, John Jarvis were subpoenaed as witness to the killing. A petition was sent around Browns Park and Vernal area saying that the killing was a terrible accident, probably started by Charlie Krause, Joe Tolliver's brother-in-law. With the petition, Joe's charge was changed to involuntary manslaughter, and Joe pleaded guilty. Joe Tolliver was sentenced to 2 months for prison and served the time in Union County Jail. There's one of the newspaper articles about the court from the Salt Lake Tribune, November 18th, 1893. A horse race between Caldwell and Krause's horse. In May of 1892, a horse race took place outside of Vernal between Thomas Caldwell's horse and Charlie Krause's horse. Charlie Krause's horse won the race, but Thomas Caldwell's horse had a hard time walking at the end of the race. Charlie was accused of doping Caldwell's horse. A trial took place and Charlie was acquitted for lack of evidence. Charlie returned to his home in Browns Park. There's a picture of Charlie crossing one of his horses. Disappearance of Don Carlos Caldwell, 1892. Don Carlos Caldwell was not happy with the outcome of the horse race and court decision. He went to Browns Park to confront Charlie Cross about it. Don never did come back. Thomas Caldwell sent his two other sons, Thomas and Francis, to Browns Park to see what happened to Don. Don's saddle and gun were found at the Cowboy Bar owned by Charlie Krause. They were told that Don had drowned in the river. They were not happy with the drowning story and kept investigating around Browns Park. Inspector Williams told them that they were in danger and they needed to leave the park or they'd be killed like their brother was. There's a newspaper article about the drowning of Don Carlos Caldwell from the Vernal Express, July 21st, 1892. Outlaw Thanksgiving Dinner. The story of the Outlaw Thanksgiving was told by Ann Bassett, Josie Bassett, and Esther Campbell. Esther believed it happened in 1895, but I believe it happened in 1893 because Butch was in the territorial prison in 1895. In November of 1893, the Powder Springs Gang and Butch Cassidy Gang decided to host a Thanksgiving dinner to thank the people of Browns Park for their kindness. There's a picture from the Denver Post in 1953 at the Outlaw Thanksgiving dinner, and they had a big article about it. At the Outlaw Thanksgiving dinner, Butch and Sundance greeted the guests at the hitching post and helped them off their wagons and buggies to take care of the horses, and they took care of the horses and hurried in to be waiters. Ice and Dart was the head clerk. Everyone was dressed in their best clothing. Before dinner, the guests prepared a program. John Jarvis gave the blessing. Everything was going well until Butch tried to serve coffee. He was trying to serve it like he's in the bunkhouse, the big coffee pots. And they heard it and grabbed Butch and told him, no, that's not how you do it at a big dinner like this. They set him up to serve coffee at a side table. After dinner, the guests went to the barn for an all-night dance. In 1953, Esther Campbell did a reenactment Outlaw Thanksgiving dinner in Mabel, Colorado. There's a picture of Josie Bassett at the Jarvie Ranch in 1953, and Bassett wrote up the menu for the Outlaw Thanksgiving dinner, and she, in 1953, gave that to Esther Campbell for the reenactment dinner. Rose Warner breaks her leg, and 3 men are shot in a shootout with Matt Warner. In 1896, after getting out of jail in Washington, Matt Warner and his wife Rose were staying at the Parser Ranch in Browns Park. One day at the spring house, Rose fell and broke her leg. Cancer developed in the leg, and Rose was taken to the doctor at Fort Duchesne, where they amputated her leg. Needing money, Matt took a job to move Coleman's camp in Dry Fork Canyon. The real reason Coleman hired Matt was to scare off a couple men trying to jump his claim. A gunfight took place and Matt killed Dave Milton and Dick Sutton. During the fight, Matt hid under a log for protection. Matt was arrested. Butch Cassidy, Elsa Lay, and Bob Meeks robbed the Montpelier Bank to get money for Matt Warner's lawyer and defense team. Matt was sentenced to 5 years in prison. There's a picture of the spring house at the Parser Ranch where Rose fell and broke her leg. Sheep herders gunfight. In October of 1897, Levi Janus and William Davenport were driving sheep around the Red Creek area. George Richard and Alberta Jones came up to them looking for lost sheep. A gunfight broke out and William Davenport was shot in the shoulder and thigh, and Alberta Jones was shot in the shoulder. No one was killed. There's a newspaper article about the shooting from the Salt Lake Tribune, October 12, 1897, and off Highway 191, just above Browns Park, there's this sheep herder monument on the hillside. In 1898, there were 5 killings and 1 lynching in Browns Park. I have a presentation about the year 1898. In 1898, Willie Stang was shot and killed by Pat Johnson at Red Creek Ranch. Valentine Hoy was shot and killed by Harry Tracy. Judge Jake Bennett was lynched at the Bassett Ranch. Ray Black was actually shot and killed by Willie McGinnis at the Red Creek Ranch. Silly's Dow was shot and killed by Charles Reeser at Dow's Ranch. Spec Albert Williams' stomach was sliced open by Charlie Krause. Bill Pigeon was shot and killed by Ike Lee above Clay Basin. There's a picture of the hanging poles. It's at the John Jarvie Ranch right now that John Bennett was hung from, and Bill Pigeon's grave and Willie Stang's grave. That brings the end of this presentation of the early years of Browns Park, the years 1800. Hope you enjoyed the presentation. If you'd like to learn more about it, I do have 2 books about Browns Park, one called Browns Park Haunted History and another one called John Jarvie. You can get those books from me at my email is charliewardle34@gmail.com, or you can go on my website, www.sites.google.com/view/charliewardle-books. Books can also be bought on Amazon. They're just a little more expensive on Amazon. Also, I do have other presentations on my website that you can view.